I believe everyone here, with one exception, knows that the Twin Towers were destroyed by controlled demolition. This young lady came here as an agnostic and we congratulate her. So that's wonderful. We'll go a little faster than usual. You know, folks, there are many conspiracy theories. We just heard about corporate personhood. There's personal corporatehood, the fluoride conspiracy, the chemtrail conspiracy. There are conspiracies about the US flag. There's a conspiracy about the Titanic, believe it or not, it's on the internet. There are conspiracies everywhere, so political activists will wonder why they should focus on 9/11. Well, tonight we are providing elements of answer to this question. We are going to show that the 9/11 conspiracy, unlike some others, does exist. We are going to prove its existence. And by this I mean that we are going to prove the existence of a conspiracy beyond the official conspiracy by which Osama bin Laden and his fanatics conspired to take flight lessons in the United States. Is this working?
Yes, it is.
It is working. Whoa, look at that. Is this useful, or would you rather have me not use the mic?
It's helpful. Better with it.
You like it with the mic?
Yes.
All right, maybe it's better for my throat too, who knows? So, there exists one official 9/11 conspiracy by which Osama bin Laden and his fanatics conspired to take flight lessons in the United States under the nose of the FBI. They passed airport security, they hijacked 4 airplanes, they slammed them into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, and the rest is history. That's one conspiracy. We are going to demonstrate tonight that there exists a 9/11 conspiracy apart from that one, which is much more frightening and much bigger in scope. We are also going to show one unique feature of 9/11 compared to just about any other conspiracy. It is so easy to enter into it. There's a point of entry to 9/11 which is very compelling, which no other conspiracy comes close to. So without further ado, let's get into the fundamental, elementary conspiracy class. The class that's purposely missing from the 6th grade curriculum worldwide. Can you remember the marking event of 9/11? Don't look too far. Here are the Twin Towers before 9/11, and here are the Twin Towers after 9/11. Quite a piece of work that Osama bin Laden and his fanatics managed to put together. Nothing remains about them. Now, most of you are probably aware that when the Twin Towers disintegrated, they threw structural steel all over the World Trade Center and provoked considerable damage in the neighboring buildings. The World Trade Center looked like a battle zone after the Twin Towers destruction. And in particular, tonight we are going to focus on one aspect of that collateral damage of the Twin Towers, which is with Building 7. Miss, did you know about Building 7's existence before this event, or did you just learn about it?
You know, I heard of a building, number 7. I didn't know why it was called number 7, if there were 7 buildings all in a plaza or what.
Absolutely. To answer your question, North Tower was building number 1. The South Tower was building number 2. There were buildings 3, 4, 5, 6, and this was building 7, the latest addition to the World Trade Center.
Is that the next highest building after the 2?
It was. It was the tallest building after the Twin Towers. In fact, it doesn't look that big here only because it is dwarfed by the Twin Towers, which were the tallest buildings in Manhattan. If you look at Building 7 on its own though, it's 47 stories tall, which means that it dwarfs anything in the Inland Empire. And in order to find something this big in Southern California, you have to go to downtown Los Angeles on the hill. It so happened that Building 7 suffered some collateral damage which is very special, even odd. Building 7's trouble started right at 10:30 in the morning when the North Tower experienced its own structural failure. As you remember, the North Tower projected huge clouds of powder all around its footprint when it failed, and this is building 7 withstanding the assault of that powder. According to the official investigators, the North Tower threw pieces of structural steel into building 7. This structural steel did not weaken building 7 significantly. However, they ignited office fires. These fires kept burning during the whole afternoon of 9/11, and eventually at 5 p.m., 7 hours after the Twin Towers destruction, they destroyed building 7. This on your right side is the result. The whole steel frame of building 7 has been dismembered and has been piled up inside its own footprint in some pyramid-like form. What is special about this destruction is that this is the only time in history that the steel-framed high-rise has been destroyed accidentally. This never happened before. And therefore we are going to look at it a little further. Let's watch television on the day of 9/11.
What you see are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Not a good videotape, the collapse of this building. Amazing, incredible picture work. For the 3rd time today, reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much of television before. A building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed gunmen to knock it down.
So this is indeed a one-of-a-kind, unintentional destruction. And Dan Roberts' comments about dynamite call for some reality check. What he's alluding to is an industrial process that engineers refer to as a controlled demolition. So behold a side-by-side comparison of building 7 destruction by an office fire and a controlled demolition.
Dan, can you move the cursor after you started?
Thank you.
Thank you.
What we notice here is that there's a striking resemblance between the motion of building 7 being destroyed by an office fire on the one hand, and the destruction of another building by a controlled demolition. Even though we are talking of completely different processes. On your left, this is a chaotic, random phenomenon that suddenly takes over the whole building and destroys it. What you have on the right is an intelligently designed process by which a team of experts, led by highly talented engineers, studies the construction and the condition of the building, designs the demolition, places thousands of explosive charges at predetermined spots, and finally blows them up in the pre-calculated sequence. First, they blow up the support columns in the basement. With the support columns gone, the rest of the building finds itself unsupported, and it does what any mass does when it's not supported. It initiates a downward acceleration. Before it hits the foundation, another round of explosions cuts the columns of the first floor, and so on and so forth, so that the intact part of the building keeps going down faster and faster. The end result is that from the perspective of the observer, it looks like the earth is giving way underneath the building. And the steel structure is normally cut into linear pieces about 10 meters long, ready to be picked up by cranes and put on trucks and shipped away. There's a deafening noise of explosions that people around the building always report. Smart engineers and smart demolitionists make sure that the pieces of steel fall inside the basement of the building, not outside, so as to limit damage to neighboring structures. And also it should be noted that the contents of the building other than steel tend to explode in powder. So a controlled demolition produces huge clouds of hot powder, several times the volume of the building. Now, given the striking resemblance between these two phenomena, there are people who conclude that Building 7 was necessarily destroyed by a controlled demolition, and that anybody promoting the theory of destruction by an office fire is wrong. We shall not follow their lead. We are rationalists, and we are going to demonstrate the existence of the 9/11 conspiracy by contradiction. This means that we are going to stick to the official version of what happened on 9/11 until we have no choice but to believe otherwise. And this does not force us to believe that Building 7 was destroyed by a controlled demolition. It shows that it looks like a controlled demolition. It does not prove that it is one. Accordingly, the people who conclude, based on this video, the controlled demolition of Building 7 do a mental shortcut, if you will. They follow their guts, their intuition, their right brain, the part of the brain that's instinctive, emotional. That's respectable, but that doesn't prove much. So, we are, and besides, the experts of the United States government who studied the destruction of Building 7 determined that it could not possibly be due to a controlled demolition. They demonstrated that the hypothesis of a controlled demolition was contradicted by objective evidence. They also found a plausible scenario of a destruction by fire that matches what happened. So who are we to dispute the experts' opinion? It took them 7 years after the events of 9/11 to come up with their final reports, and they certainly understand thermodynamics, metallurgy, and motion better than we. Besides, the experts from the National Institute of Standards and Technology produced a video simulation of Building 7's destruction as part of their report. They simulated every beam and every column of Building 7, and they demonstrated that assuming an office fire would run very hot around this spot where I put the mouse, it would induce a cascade of structural failures with joints breaking one after another at a rhythm of several hundred joints per second. These would cause extensive damage inside the building, while the envelope would be pretty much intact. Hence the misleading impression that people will have that it looks like a controlled demolition, whereas it's a completely different phenomenon. So we'll be grateful for these very smart engineers for what they did. However, there seem to be some discrepancies between their model and the reality. For once, you'll notice easily that there are some heavy deformations on the top, especially the corner that you see that you least see, the top left back corner. It falls in considerably and ends up in this position here. Let's run it again and see that it lands there. See, it is about here, and it's making a big horizontal movement here before falling down. This is something that did not happen in reality. Another interesting phenomenon besides the folding is the tilting to the right. If I put the cursor here, you're going to see that the edge of the building falls to the right as it moves down, which did not happen in reality. Another important discrepancy between this model and the reality is the acceleration of the roof line when it goes down. It is much slower than what happened in reality, and you can see that even just by a short visual inspection here. Finally, the video evidence shows us over 6 seconds of the fall of the envelope of Building 7, and the engineers of the National Institute of Standards and Technology run their model for longer than that, but they show us less than 2 seconds of the roof or the floor line. What a shame that they did not give us a little more, especially noticing that here there's an interesting bending that's occurring, where some support columns are being bent and buckled. So it would be so interesting to see what happens when the top part hits the bottom part as a hammer. How would the movement continue after that? So we won't know because that part of the model has not been released to the public. Anyway, if we recapitulate what we learned here, on 9/11, in the World Trade Center, apart from the Twin Towers, another skyscraper experienced a complete, sudden, and rapid structural failure. It was caused by an office fire, a very special office fire that did something that nothing has done before, destroyed unintentionally a steel frame high-rise. And this destruction was very similar to a controlled demolition. The US government and the National Institute of Standards and Technology analyzed this event from a technical standpoint. They came up with a model that provides a poor match to the video evidence, whereas the model of a controlled demolition provides a very good match. And where it gets really curious is that somehow very few people remember this event from the day of 9/11. Even humanists are just learning about it recently. Whereas this would have been the subject of an excellent documentary. Imagine featuring a couple of professional demolition engineers showing this video and a few more and admiring the characteristics of this office fire that would outsmart them, literally. And then finishing by telling people to not set up their own skyscrapers on fire in the hope of destroying them. It would not work. And the conclusion of the television documentary would have been, do not trust your instinct, do not trust your gut feelings, appearances are deceiving, and your right brain is better kept dormant. What better conclusion for a television documentary? And here comes the first 9/11 enigma. Not a single television channel anywhere in the world has aired that documentary. It would have been as simple, as inexpensive as a 10-minute segment. The materials were widely available. All they had to do was to interview a couple of experts, and voila. So here comes the big question, how come they didn't do it? And what we see here is a pattern that we will repeat as we go into 9/11. First, a very special event occurs. In this case, the once in history destruction of a steel frame high-rise by an office fire. Second, an explanation is given for the event, which is less than convincing. The model of the destruction by fire by the National Institute of Standards and Technology does not match well the evidence, whereas the controlled demolition model does. And the third level, which is the most disturbing level, is that somehow the public is not made aware of it. So we shall conclude that there's a problem with television that dwarfs whatever happened to Building 7. So this is arguably the best point of entry in 9/11, and I would say in any conspiracy. It doesn't matter what kind of, I guess, preconceived opinion people have, it's very difficult to disagree with this. In fact, I would advise you that when you reach out on 9/11, if you find somebody who looks at this video comparison and tells you that this proves that Building 7 was destroyed by fire, you might as well not insist and walk away.
Can I ask you,
Please.
are there any other views of the building going down besides that? And where did that picture come from? Who took that picture?
Oh, there are many videos of controlled demolitions. Controlled demolitions companies usually make a record of their work.
No, I mean Building 7.
Oh, the one of Building 7. This comes from the television records of 9/11. There are few records of building 7, but there are a few. Why don't we go again to Dan Noel and what he did. Here we go. This is what you have seen on PDF, on CBS.
Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse of the cell. You want to go to videotape the collapse of this building. Amazing, incredible picture work. For the third time today, reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much of television before. A building was deliberately destroyed by low-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Yeah, on BBC, they actually announced the collapse of the building before it fell. And it was right.
We'll get there.
Oh,
We'll get there. Okay, let's open the Q&A, but please, let's keep the questions germane to what was said. Let's not anticipate. There's an encyclopedia of information about 9/11, and this is the essential class. I'm trying to bring you up to speed as fast as possible, giving you as little information as necessary so that you can progress to a humongous conspiracy that 9/11 is.
Just a very quick addition, if you do bring this up with an engineer and they are aware there's an explanation, and they not only have confidence in this explanation, usually not having read it, but they're just confident about the whole thing, and they say there was never any real question. They just had to dot the I's and cross the T's. Remind them that the New York Times had a headline that said, "Engineers are baffled by the collapse of Building 7." It was a big deal. It was not obvious that the fires did this. And that's why it took them 7 years to come up with a
May I?
Dimitri.
story.
Yeah, thank you. Steve, the video that I sent you the other day, that I forwarded you, has two very troubling shots. First of all, it has Mayor Giuliani running very anxious.
Okay, Dimitri, I'm sorry, I think you're going way ahead of ourselves.
Sorry, I
Let-
can talk later.
Yeah, you are going with the Twin Towers, and that's not for tonight.
No, that is for number 7.
Okay, but we are not there yet.
All right.
And actually, you won't go there. It's interesting information, it's important, but we have to minimize what we teach to get people to know the conspiracy. There are many ways to teach a conspiracy of Building 7. And, I mean, I could talk about Building 7 for half a day without stopping.
Sorry, Dan, I'm sorry, I apologize, but I'm giving you a fact. I saw it on video. And there's another person who said the same thing. They were expecting number 7 to collapse at any moment.
Okay, thank you, Dimitri. I don't mean to be tough on you, but there are plenty of facts that are known about Building 7, and we could still be there at midnight talking about them. I could do that. I've got 3 times as many slides as I'm going to present to you about Building 7. So in the interest of time, and for our friend here who's meeting Building 7, let's minimize the amount of information she has to accumulate to know that Building 7 is a subject of a conspiracy. Don, one last thing.
Yeah, okay, I'll make this quick. There was a great debate at the Spy Center in Washington, D.C. in the last couple of weeks. It was between
I
Webster.
saw that. That was good.
Oh, you saw
Saw
that?
that.
Okay, well, the point I'm trying to make here is that Jonathan Kay's remark about Building 7 was that the fires were raging for hours. And,
I'm going to cut you off. We'll get there later.
okay, but
Please,
what I wanted to say is.
I know you want to say something. Please stop it. We have to move on. In 1 hour and a half, we have to be out of here.
He's got to prove the NIST theory, okay? So don't disturb.
We'll get there. But please, don't give facts about Building 7 that are not in there, otherwise we're going to get further behind our schedule. We already have half an hour to make up for, so this is not the time to say more things that are in the slideshow. So if you have a question about what has been said, if you don't agree with my conclusions, please say so. Otherwise, please let's not add more facts to prove something that's already been proven.
Well, this was the counterpoint to this building falling down. This was the NIST example according to Kay, and he said it was the fires were raging, but you could see no smoke. And he said the reason why that is such a conspiracy is because that the fires were on the other side of the building, which you can't even see any smoke. So here's the example.
Okay, thank you, Don. You had a question?
Yeah, not being an engineer or anything, and from what I heard you say, they think that Building 7, some metal from one of the other towers went into 7 and started this smoldering fire?
That's right, this is what happened here. So for the time being, that's what I asked you to believe.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what the experts are saying.
And is it realistic that the smoldering metal could?
More on that later.
Okay.
For the time being, these are the bare facts as presented by the experts. And we do not have to go into all sorts of details about what happened to Building 7 to know there's a problem. What we went through here is a very superficial examination of Building 7, and we found that just after 5 minutes of examining superficial evidence, there's a problem with television. The television should have showed us this and marveled at the fact that things are not what they seem to be, and we should never trust our intuition. And they didn't. So there's a problem with television. So what I propose to do next is forget about Building 7 and its problems. As far as we know, it happened the way the National Institute of Standards and Technology tells us. The North Tower projected steel into Building 7. It ignited fires, and 7 hours later, this happened. It just happens coincidentally to be very similar to what would be expected from a controlled demolition. Coincidence, things happen. However, the problem is with television. So, how do we solve the television problem? Well, a simple way to do it is to go to the internet, find a listing of all TV channels worldwide, send them this video and maybe a little more information, and ask them why they did not put up a documentary on this. Inexpensive, highly educational, great conclusion, don't trust your right brain. Why didn't they do it? Now, an easier way to figure that may be to go into the details of what happened with Building 7. And that an advantage of making a little excursion into the specifics of Building 7's destruction is that maybe we'll be able to give some more perspective as to the problem of television. Now, question, how do we apprehend what really happened to Building 7? Well, here's a point of entry, the model of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We know that it offers a poor match to the video evidence. So by definition, there's something wrong with it. The engineers of the National Institute of Standards and Technology did not get it right. And this gives us a reason to inspect their work. So what we are going to do is review the technical report of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and we will examine how it accounts for the evidence of Building 7. The video evidence, the forensic evidence, the testimonies by people who witnessed Building 7 coming down, and we'll see if there's a good match between the report and the evidence. One extreme conclusion could be that, oh, there's a very good match. The engineers and scientists did what they could with what they had, and we are through. They explained satisfactorily what happened. Another extreme is that we may find that they did not take into account the evidence properly, and we may find sufficiently severe errors to dismiss their technical work as irrelevant. If we get there, if we go that route, we will have to review the theory of destruction by fire on its own, knowing that it is not supported by the experts. So we will again review the evidence. Video evidence, forensic evidence, anecdotal evidence, and we will see how it matches the theory of a destruction by office fire. Here also, at one extreme end, we will find that there's a great match, and we will stop there. It will be obvious that Building 7 was destroyed by fire as accounted in the official reports. At the other end, we may find that there's a very poor match, in which case we'll have to dismiss the theory of destruction by fire. Should we get there, it will be time to examine the possibility that maybe it's not a coincidence that Building 7's videos match what is expected of a controlled demolition. Could it be that Building 7 was actually demolished by a team of experts? And in order to establish that, we'll have again to examine the whole evidence, video, forensic, anecdotal, against the theory of explosive demolition. Again, two extreme outcomes are possible. On the one hand, we find a terrible match, and we'll have to dismiss the theory of controlled demolition. And, well, we just won't know what happened to Building 7. Another extreme possible outcome is that we will find that there's a good match between the evidence and the theory of demolition. In which case, we will conclude that Building 7 was actually demolished, in spite of what the experts told us. Great process is just a bit tedious because if you count it, we are going to examine the same evidence 3 times. There may be a bit of redundancy in the effort. So would there be a way to kill 3 birds with 1 stone and demonstrate by looking at the evidence only once? Number 1, the irrelevance of the official technical report by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Number 2, technical impossibility of the destruction by fire. And number 3, the technical plausibility of the destruction by controlled demolition. Well, a clue that will help us get there is that to demonstrate the plausibility of the controlled demolition, we need to show that the theory of the demolition matches every major attribute of the evidence. That's going to be an extensive investigation. However, to disprove the validity of the report, or to disprove the destruction by fire, we need to find theoretically only one major mismatch between the evidence and the theory. Because a theory that does not account for one major aspect of the evidence has to be rejected. So maybe there's a trick by which you are going to focus on demonstrating the technical plausibility of the demolition, and we will make note that we need to demonstrate the impossibility of the destruction by fire and the irrelevance of the technical report by the National Institute of Standards and Technology that supports it. Ready? Shall we go? Let's go. What we are going to do is brainstorm all the expected attributes of a controlled demolition, and we will check if the evidence supports these attributes. If it does, we will conclude that the controlled demolition is plausible. We already went through what a controlled demolition is like when we examined the videos, so without further ado, let's check how this will work. First criterion of a controlled demolition: if Building 7 was destroyed by a controlled demolition, then the destruction will start suddenly and will start at the base of the building. Conversely, if we find objective evidence that the destruction did not start suddenly or did not start at the base, we will have a reason to doubt the plausibility of the controlled demolition. Now, conversely, if Building 7 was destroyed by an office fire would not provoke a sudden onset of the destruction. One reason among many they build high-rises with a steel frame is that steel, when it starts to weaken, deforms before breaking into a catastrophic fashion. So we would expect to see a progressive structural failure. And also, evidently, the failure would not start in the basement, but at the level of the fires, which were around the 10th floor. Sounds fair? Let's examine the evidence. We already know that the destruction of Building 7 started suddenly. That's what television shows. Now, how about whether the destruction started in the zone of the fire or at the base? Well, it's not easy to see that from the television records, so how about finding somebody who would have been close to Building 7 and who would have seen it? Perhaps some first responder who would have seen Building 7's failure better than television? Let's see.
We were watching the building actually because of the top fire, the top floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound like a clap of thunder, turned around, see at the building was, well, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. Then, about a second later, the bottom floor caved out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. We were in shock, and then the worst part.
All right, so here's somebody who claims he was close and he saw that the destruction started at the base of the building, which is not where the fires were raging. He also, by the way, gives us interesting clues that are compatible with the theory of demolition. Once the support columns in the basement are cut, the stress in the upper columns is relieved, and that normally provokes some wave-like motion in the facades of the building. It's usually not recorded on videos, but what that guy is saying is compatible with the theory of the controlled demolition. So, if we recapitulate, since we found objective evidence that the destruction of building 7 started suddenly and at the base, we are meeting the first criterion for the technical plausibility of the controlled demolition. And we also find objective evidence to doubt the plausibility of the destruction by fire. Accordingly, we are going to make a note that the technical report on this matter by the National Institute of Standards and Technology shall properly account for this evidence as they demonstrate the plausibility of the destruction by fire. Next, if Building 7 was demolished, its trajectory would be straight down. The building would go from above downwards with symmetry and would remain within its own perimeter. So, if we found objective evidence that Building 7 did not move straight down and did not land into its footprint, we will have a reason to doubt the controlled demolition. Conversely, if Building 7 was destroyed by an office fire, fire is incapable of some symmetrical work. We would expect, assuming that the building would break, some lack of symmetry. Part of the building would fall sideways. So, this point is pretty trivial. We already know that Building 7 fell pretty much straight down. And the photographic evidence clearly shows that it fell pretty much in its own footprint. This is the steel frame of Building 7, which is forming a kind of a pyramid well-centered in the middle of its perimeter. And we'll look at that into more details later. So what we find here is once again evidence that is compatible with the second criterion of the controlled demolition hypothesis, and which is not compatible with the expectations of an office fire destruction. Accordingly, we'll make a note that this evidence will have to be accounted for in the report of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Next, demolishing a building the size of Building 7 is not a trivial endeavor. When you have a building that's very tall and narrow, it's a challenge to get the structural steel to fall down. Not only that, but to have it piled up in a pyramid, engineers need to use some techniques so that when the steel is cut in midair, it tends to fall towards the inside of the building. That's not trivial. One of the techniques they like to use to do that is to blow up the support columns of the center of the building before those of the periphery. When the center columns are blown out, the horizontal beams found themselves unsupported in the center, they sag, and they tend to pull inward slightly the outer columns. So that when the outer columns blow up, gravity will pull them down, and the pull of the beams will send them slightly inwards. And if the engineers calculate everything right, these members of outside steel will fall down and a little bit inside, so they pile up in a nice pyramid. This is the kind of work that a random office fire would be believed to be incapable of doing, or if it did it, it would be an extraordinary coincidence. Now, how do we see that?
Can I ask a quick question? what would happen with a fire of that nature, office fire? What would happen to a building if it fell because of a bad fire?
Well, that's what we are
Oh, you're gonna tell
seeing.
that?
Yeah, well, if there was an office fire, if building 7 was brought down by an office fire, and if its columns were cut by an office fire, it's hard to believe that the fire would cut the center columns and then propagate the figure to the periphery, which
Would it fall
the
on
demolition
the
would
side,
do.
would it fall on?
Yeah, we went already there, that was the second criteria.
Okay.
Building 7 fell straight down, and the fire would be expected to fall it sideways.
Okay.
Anyway, how can we notice if the destruction of building 7 progresses from the center out? Well, if there was maybe some protrusion on top of building 7, on the roof, we would expect that protrusion to come down a little bit below the building as a whole. And since building 7 is rectangular, we would expect the drop to propagate from the middle of the building to the middle of the facade, so that the center of the facade would go down a little bit before the corners. Subtle to see, but let's try. Let me put the here. I'm going to put the cursor in the middle of the roof. Here, let me see. Oh, too late. We don't see it. There's a protrusion on top of building 7, and we missed it. Let's redo it again.
Oh, okay, yeah.
There. See this protrusion on top of the building? Question, is it falling before the roof? It looks like it. And now do we see the roof taking some kind of a V shape? Maybe the bottom of the V is here, it's no longer straight. So it looks like this is compatible with the theory that the destruction propagates from the center of the building towards the periphery. First the middle of the facade and then the corners.
And real quick, we have some new analysis from David Chandler, who's looked at 3 videos taken from roof level, and the apparent kink that we've all been thinking the roof line was going down a little bit, it's actually being sucked away from us at this perspective. So we see the sky in a V shape. It still supports the theory because the penthouse goes down first and all of that. This is kind of like a minor aspect of the list of 9 items. But I think it's interesting we have this additional evidence which, not to get too far ahead, contradicts NIST's story about the sequence of columns.
Yeah, and you're contradicting me, thank you, I'm learning something. So according to David Chandler, what happens here is that the middle of the facade is being destroyed before the corners, but it doesn't go down, it goes inward.
It goes inward.
That's what you're saying.
Yes, which is still consistent with the attempt to make a small compact tile and not damage other buildings.
Yeah, it is consistent with the idea that I'm trying to get the steel inside. So this video is compatible with what would be expected of a controlled demolition.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Well, let's see it to the end. Maybe when it comes back up, we can get another view. Here's a nice view, right? This may be the best way to appreciate the succession in the phases of the initial drop. First, the central protrusion goes down, then the middle of the facade, and finally the building as a whole. So here again, as we looked at the very details of the onset of the destruction, it is compatible with what would be expected from a controlled demolition. And assuming an office fire could do that, it would be almost miraculous. It would be an extreme combination of coincidences. So once again, we will expect that the experts from the National Institute of Standards and Technology have taken that evidence into account as they affirm the destruction by an office fire.
I'd like to add something. An office fire usually burns at a low melting point, I believe.
We'll get there later. Don't disturb the class, we we've got a schedule to meet and let's not anticipate. Okay, next criterion of controlled demolition. We already know that building 7's trajectory follows what would be expected of a controlled demolition. Now is the time to measure it. When a steel frame high-rise is destroyed by a controlled demolition, the part of the building that's moving is supported by nothing. So it goes down in free fall or close to free fall. As such, we would expect that if we measure the acceleration of the building as it goes down, it will be equal or close to the acceleration of gravity, which is 9.8 meters per square second. Conversely, if the building was destroyed by fire, fire is incapable of cutting completely the support of the building, and even if it was able to do that in the zone of the fire, once the top and the bottom of the building hit each other, the drop would be slowed down somehow. So we are going to measure the downward acceleration of building 7. If we find that it is close to the acceleration of gravity, we will have a reason to doubt the hypothesis of destruction by fire. If we find that it is much below the acceleration of gravity, we'll have a reason to doubt the destruction by controlled demolition. Let's do it. Speaking of David Chandler, here are a certain number of video shots of building 7 extracted from a video at the beginning of the drop, 1 second into the drop, 2 seconds into the drop, etc. What we notice is that as time goes by, the difference between successive shots is getting bigger, which means that the speed of the destruction is going up. Building 7 is going faster and faster as time goes by, which means it is accelerating. Well, good news, there's an acceleration. So how do we measure that acceleration? Well, it requires the use of some college mathematics, which we will not get into. Suffice to say that the end result is that this is a curve, a graph, where we plot in the abscissa, the horizontal axis, the time between 0, the initiation of the destruction, and 4 seconds. Here on the ordinate, the vertical axis, we plot the drop. And the dots you see there are the drops measured on the video at different times. The curve you see is the best adjustment of a constant acceleration that would provide the most favorable fit with these points. In other words, somebody did some calculations to figure which value of the acceleration would provide the best match with the available empirical data. So the first thing we see is that the match between the curve and the points is very good. That tells us that the model of a constant acceleration fits very well the data of the drop of building 7's roof. And then if we look at the value of the optimal acceleration, we find that it's approximately 9.81 meter per square second, which is 9% below free fall acceleration. This is well within the expected range of a controlled demolition, and it's hard to believe that the fire would be able to oppose so little resistance to the drop of a building. And therefore, we conclude once again that this meets the fourth criterion of the controlled demolition, and it provides another reason to doubt the technical plausibility of the destruction by an office fire. And once again, we expect that the National Institute of Standards and Technology took this evidence into account as they demonstrated the plausibility of the destruction by fire. Next, if Building 7 was demolished, then its steel structure would be completely dismantled. Demolition engineers like to reduce costs. You know, that's how we make big bucks. We save costs to our employers and our clients. So they will often put a couple of extra explosive charges to make sure that there's no steel assembly left. They like the demolition to produce linear pieces of steel 10 meters long that are ready to be picked up, put on a truck and hauled away. So if building 7 was demolished, we expect that the steel structure will be indeed dismembered, or almost entirely dismembered. Accordingly, if we find objective evidence that the steel frame was not dismembered, we will doubt the hypothesis of controlled demolition. Conversely, if building 7 was destroyed by an office fire has great difficulty breaking steel. One could imagine that it would bend, deform steel, but to break the frame of a high-rise into thousands of pieces is hard to imagine. Accordingly, if we find that the frame of building 7 was indeed dismembered, we will have a reason to doubt the theory of destruction by fire. This question is not trivial. I cannot show you what the destruction by accident of a steel frame high-rise would look like, because it's never happened except for building 7. However, other high-rises have fallen before these due to earthquakes, and it's visible that their frame is not dismembered. The structure of the high-rise is easy to recognize. So this is the kind of result we would expect if building 7 had been destroyed by an office fire. So what did building 7 look like? Well, here it is. The whole steel frame has been indeed dismembered, and its linear members are piled up inside what used to be the basement of building 7. So here again, we find that the criterion of controlled demolition is pretty much met, and we have another reason to doubt the plausibility of the destruction by fire.
Back to the prayer shop, what are those long flat things? Yeah, but what are those? It's like a red.
It's a facade, isn't it?
Yeah, these are ornaments.
That's the wall on that side.
Yeah. This is not structural steel for whatever reason. These are just some architectural ornaments. For some reason, the steel got destroyed and the ornaments didn't get destroyed.
Yeah, so very good, very perceptive.
Nice observation.
Why didn't they?
Fell in, they just fell in.
Actually, we are going to see in a moment something that tells us that the demolition, if the demolition existed, was imperfect. Okay, next. Demolition engineers are paid to demolish a building, and they are not paid to demolish adjacent structures. So, if building 7 was demolished, we would expect that it would fall mostly inwards, and that the steel would not damage neighboring buildings. So if we find that a large quantity of steel hit neighboring buildings, we'll have a reason to doubt the hypothesis of controlled demolition. Conversely, if building 7 was destroyed by an office fire, then we would reasonably expect that there would be a lack of symmetry in the failure of building 7, and some neighboring buildings could be damaged, like what we see in these buildings. They were destroyed accidentally, and they did damage structures that were close to them. So, what happened to building 7? Well, here it is. The steel frame, as we've seen before, essentially dropped into its own footprint, and it seems like some steel from the outer facade of building 7 went inside to pylons. There are some exceptions. Here there's some steel that did hit a building nearby. But since some of you guys are into the proportions of 99% and 1%, the amount of steel that's left in the footprint of building 7 is way above 99%. So this is quite compatible with a well-done controlled demolition and incompatible with the expectation of an office fire. Think of the 99%. Next, if building 7 was demolished, there would be explosions. So, if we find that there's no evidence of explosions, we'll have a reason to doubt the plausibility of the controlled demolition. Conversely, if building 7 was not destroyed by a controlled demolition, but by an office fire, we would not hear explosions. There would be pieces of the structure banging against each other, shocks, mechanical shocks of all sorts, but no explosions. Accordingly, if we find objective evidence that there were explosions, we will doubt the plausibility of the destruction by fire. If we find objective evidence that there were explosions, actually, almost. If we find objective evidence of explosions, we will have another reason to doubt the plausibility of the destruction by fire. If we find evidence of no explosions, we'll have a reason to doubt the controlled demolition. But how would we know about explosions? Let's ask Barry Jennings, a high-ranking public servant of the city of New York who had the misfortune of being trapped in Building 7 after it was evacuated.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing. When we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor, I heard some more explosions.
What's the sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes.
We started walking down the stairs and made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor.
When we get outside, the police officer comes to me and says you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run. But
All right. Interestingly, this is an interview on the BBC by Barry Jennings. Prior to this interview, he was interviewed by Loose Change, a group of 9/11 activists, and there he affirmed that he heard explosions before the destruction of the Twin Towers. However, fortunately, the BBC refreshed his memory, and in his interview with the BBC, he dropped the mention that the first explosions took place before the destruction of the Twin Towers. So this is the official record. In other words, that's what he said before, but in the BBC, which is his latest work, he doesn't say that. So as far as we know, the explosions took place after the destruction of the Twin Towers. It makes no sense, doesn't it? And sadly, Mr. Jennings can no longer talk about it because he died in 2008. Coincidentally, a few days before the National Institute of Standards and Technology released its report on the destruction of Building 7. Just one of those unfortunate coincidences.
Having not interviewed him.
It bears remembering that there was another high-ranking public servant of New York who was trapped into Building 7 with Barry Jennings by the name of Hess. He also remembered explosions in Building 7. However, on his BBC interview, he denied them. Just for the record, something is not quite right in there somewhere.
So he told somebody that he heard it and then somebody else did.
Yeah, well, the BBC refreshed his memory and they got the record straight. So we will take Barry Jennings' testimony with a grain of salt. Anyway, how about this member of the police department of New York?
And the whole time you hear him boom, 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 boom. So, I think I know an explosion when I hear it. You know, I was real close to Building 7 when it fell down, and I don't know, but that didn't sound like just a building falling down on me while I was running away from it. There's a lot of eyewitness testimony down there hearing explosions. I didn't see any reason for that building to fall down the way it did, and a lot of guys should be saying the same thing.
Okay, now here also, let's take this with a grain of salt. Why would Barker say that his colleagues should say the same thing? That's a bit weird. So let's not take him too seriously. How about this man, one of the first responders of the World Trade Center?
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds. You heard explosions, like boom. And it's like a distinct sound. It's not like when the compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Now here we have a testimony not only of explosions, but of some movement of the ground before Building 7 started its motion. And that's compatible with the theory that it is being demolished by explosives inside its basement underground. Let's see if we have something more about explosions. Oh, here, some people who were on the street in the afternoon.
Yeah, here's one of the things you can tell you I'm okay, all right? Yeah, no. You want to call your mother?
Okay, so these explosions cannot possibly come from the Twin Towers. They've been destroyed for a long time. So here we found a correlation with the testimony of Barry Jennings, that it stands to reason that there would have been some explosions in Building 7 way before its destruction. And that is compatible with the theory of a controlled demolition. Demolition engineers will often weaken the building by cutting columns, either by hand or by explosives ahead of the demolition. So we have to conclude that it seems indeed that there were explosions in Building 7, not only during its destruction, but before also. And this is compatible with the demolition hypothesis. And again, this is something that the National Institute of Standards and Technology will have to account for in order to restore the plausibility of the destruction by an office fire. Let's move on. Finally, if Building 7 was destroyed by a controlled demolition, all the contents of the building would be pulverized by the explosions. And since the explosions would produce a high quantity of gas, this powder would provoke some very big clouds of several times the volume of Building 7. Pyroclastic clouds of the type you find in a volcano. So if we do not find such voluminous clouds of powder, we will have a reason to doubt the theory of controlled demolition. On the contrary, if Building 7 was destroyed by an office fire, there is no reason why there would be a sudden massive pulverization of the building's contents and why that powder would yield clouds several times the volume of the building. So if we find the presence of these clouds, we'll have another reason to doubt the hypothesis of destruction by fire. Let's have a look. Well, they say that the picture is worth 1,000 words and the video is worth 1,000 pictures. There definitely is a big river of powder leaving Building 7 and whose volume is several times that of Building 7. So this once again is compatible with the theory of controlled demolition and incompatible with the theory of destruction by an office fire. Let's recap what we've done here. We have reviewed all the macroscopic technical evidence related to Building 7. We have found that it meets all the expected criteria of uncontrolled demolition, and we have found many reasons to doubt the plausibility of the destruction by fire. There are people who will stop thinking at this point and determine that Building 7 was evidently destroyed by a controlled demolition, that the theory of destruction by fire has to be rejected, and that anybody who says otherwise doesn't know what he or she is talking about. Of course, we shall not follow their lead. We are rationalists. We are demonstrating the conspiracy of 9/11 by contradiction, and we have to remember that the experts reached the opposite conclusion. The National Institute of Standards and Technology had 7 years to review everything we reviewed, and much more. They are much smarter than us, and they reached the opposite conclusions. Now that puts in perspective the television documentary we were talking about. Imagine the hit of a documentary putting all this evidence on the screen for 1 or 2 hours and concluding that, you know, it doesn't matter how much you observe, it doesn't matter how much you reflect, you guys are going to get the wrong conclusions. The experts are the only ones who can figure what happened here. It's not just your right brain, your intuitive thinking that doesn't work. Your left brain, the one that uses observation and reason, is no good either. So the conclusion of the documentary would be, you know that organ you have there in your head, better put it to sleep. When something a little bit out of the beaten path occurs, don't think too much about it. You'll reach your own conclusions. Trust the experts and trust television to bring the experts to you. Wouldn't it be an exciting documentary? So again, we have to ask the question, how is it that not a single television channel would give us that wonderful message? This becomes more enigmatic than ever. At the same time as we continue our investigation, it is urgent to get the experts to speak out. Let's see if they can straighten us out. Let's see if they can explain why we are wrong. What is it that they understand that we are incapable of fathoming about Building 7? Before we get there, any question? Thank you. Let's move on. What time is it? Yeah, we need, well, I think we'll make it by 8:30. All right. Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth have decided to pursue their excursion into Building 7 by pushing their luck. Assuming, hypothetically, that Building 7 was indeed demolished, the chief engineers of the demolition could have decided to use several techniques to cut the steel. And they could have made the decision to use some steel melting techniques to cut the steel. If you imagine a steel beam, you can cut it with a concussion charge, which works like a hammer, just ping, shear it in a fraction of a second. But you can also conceivably put a heating charge, something that will suddenly melt a section of the beam, and that will have the same impact. The beam will be split in two. So architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth ask the question, would by any chance the principal engineers of Building 7's putative demolition have decided to melt the steel locally? Well, if indeed they decided to melt the steel, there would be traces of molten steel. So, accordingly, if we do not find traces of molten steel in Building 7, we will have a reason to doubt the use of steel melting technologies in the hypothetical controlled demolition. Conversely, if we find evidence of molten steel, we will have another reason to doubt the destruction by an office fire, because one reason they build towers like Building 7 with steel is that precisely an office fire is incapable of melting steel. And this time, we are going to let the experts speak out. In a moment, you're going to hear Dr. John Gross, Chief Engineer at the National Institute of Standards and Technology and Director of the Technical Investigation into the structural failure of Building 7 and also of the Twin Towers. Now, there's a bit of confusion, so please pay attention. You are going to hear Dr. Gross speak of his work on the Twin Towers. He released the technical reports on the Twin Towers destruction in 2005, and he's going to be speaking in Austin, Texas, a few months afterwards. And somebody just asked him a loaded question about the presence of molten steel in the basement of the Twin Towers. So, let's listen to the expert.
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, no eyewitness who said so, nobody who produced it.
You get down below and you see molten steel. Molten steel running down the channel. Like you're in a fountain. Like lava.
No eyewitness who said so.
There are actually melted beams where it was molten steel.
Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of the wall.
The cleanup was very difficult. The steel was coming out red in certain areas for the first couple of weeks at least.
Produced it.
This fused element of steel, molten steel.
Nobody produced it. Nobody produced it.
That's the pictures.
They're talking about the Twin Towers there, right?
Thank you for asking. I was going to answer that question.
Just want to make sure.
This is confusing. There's a lot of confusion regarding the molten steel evidence, so it's hard to tell whether they're talking of the Twin Towers or something else, and this is where this picture comes in. This picture was taken by satellites from NASA, and it's a thermal mapping of the World Trade Center. And there are three hotspots at the surface of the World Trade Center. This is the South Tower, this is the North Tower, the two Twin Towers, and this is Building 7. The temperatures we see here are around 800 degrees C, which is about halfway between the ambient temperature and the temperature of molten iron. So it stands to reason that the source of heat that produces these temperatures must be around the zone of molten iron. And this means that if there was molten iron in the World Trade Center after 9/11, it would be in the South Tower, the North Tower, and Building 7. So these testimonies are partly germane to Building 7. Let's finish it.
Oh, where's,
Done.
oh, where's building 6?
I don't know, it's not there, there's nothing, it's not hot.
Like on the video, it said molten iron, and you're talking about molten steel. What difference is there as far as melting point, or why does it say molten iron on the video?
The melting point, alloys of iron have a different melting point for pure iron, but we don't have the time to get into that, and we don't need to anyway. It's all around 1100 to 1300 degrees C. It's all in the same zone, way out there.
Okay, so I mean, as far as I'm saying steel and then iron.
Don't forget about the difference.
I think you're looking about 1800 degrees.
That's Fahrenheit. I'm talking Celsius, not the engineers. I'm sorry.
Molten energy shows those sorts of temperatures in the nation.
I know of absolutely nobody, no eyewitness who says so, nobody who produced it.
Okay, so the expert has spoken out and he's pretty clear. He's speaking about the Twin Towers, but needless to say, following that conference, Dr. Groves and his colleagues at the National Institute of Standards and Technology received abundant communications regarding objective evidence of molten iron in Building 7. So this leads us to the question, how did they treat that evidence in their final report on the structural failure of Building 7? And since we are getting short of time, the short answer is that they ignored it. They could have mentioned its existence and explained it. They could have mentioned its existence and said, hey, we don't understand this and somebody has to figure it out, but we maintain our conclusions anyway. They could have done plenty of things, they ignored it. They didn't even say that this comes from conspiracy theorists. It's not in their theory. And this leads us to our initial question. We have chosen so far to demonstrate the 9/11 conspiracy by contradiction, which means that we are sticking to the official 9/11 narrative by which Building 7 was destroyed by an office fire ignited by members of the Twin Towers. And that any discrepancies in the story could be explained by some incompetence, negligence, and maybe a bit of corruption to save the retirement of some public servant who was asleep at the wheel, or to preserve the business of a well-connected corporation. You know, nothing shocking. However, it's hard to believe that Dr. Groves and his colleagues omitted the evidence of molten steel in their report on Building 7 by negligence and by incompetence. Those people are seasoned engineers. They contracted universities and corporations to help them investigate Building 7. So it looks like the only plausible explanation for their failure to even mention the allegations of molten steel in Building 7 is that it was intentional. They knew what they were doing and they wanted to not mention that evidence in their report. So here we are, for the first time, given an objective reason to doubt the integrity of the technical work on Building 7 of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And by the same token, we are starting to doubt seriously the plausibility of the destruction by fire. The only reason we believed it 5 minutes ago was that that's what the experts were saying. And then conversely, the technical plausibility of the destruction by controlled demolition is still intact. architects and engineers for 9/11 chooses at this point to push their ball a little further. Now that it seems like the chief engineers of Building 7's demolition chose to melt at least a large part of the structural steel, what technologies would they use to melt steel? Melting steel is not trivial. Very few chemical reactions can do that. That's what you find in a blast furnace, for instance. Now, in practicality, when it comes to a controlled demolition, the chemical reaction that engineers will usually use is thermite. The challenge of cutting steel, of melting steel, is to produce temperatures that are high enough to exceed steel's melting point, which is around 1300 degrees C. An ordinary flame cannot do that. So chemical engineers use a mixture that has a very high oxygen content to increase the temperature of the flame. And thermite is in thermite, the oxygen is contained in iron oxide, which is similar to rust. And the fuel is metallic aluminum. When aluminum and iron oxide are put together and heated up at a high enough temperature, the oxygen detaches itself from the atoms of iron and combines itself with the atoms of aluminum, and this produces an extremely high temperature, which is capable of melting neighboring steel. So here, the architects and engineers for 9/11 proof asked the question, assuming Building 7 was demolished, and assuming the chief engineer decided to use thermite, well, there would be traces of thermite in the forensic evidence. So accordingly, if we find no traces of thermite, we will doubt that the demolition used thermite. Conversely, if Building 7 was destroyed by an office fire, well, there's no way an office fire could melt steel, and there's no way a thermitic compound could be found in an office building anyway. So if we find thermitic traces in abundance in Building 7's forensic evidence, we will have another reason to doubt the destruction by fire. All right. Well, let's start with the official report. You know, I don't wish for that to happen, if this library caught fire, and the fire was serious enough for the firefighters to come and put it out, they'll put the fire out, all right. And you'll notice that once there's no more fire, the firefighters don't leave. They stay around, they walk around, they observe, and they ask questions to people. And if you ask them what the hell they are doing and what they are wasting taxpayers' money in overtime, they'll tell you that they just want to make doubly sure there's nothing left burning, because they don't want the fire to experience a resurgence, and they don't want to come back, and they don't want taxpayers to say that they are not doing their job. That's only partly true. Indeed, they are doing that. But they'll be doing something else. They'll also be looking for clues of arson. They will check all the forensic evidence, and they will check all the testimonies to figure if there's a possibility that the fire was criminal. They won't tell you that, but they will do that. And in fact, this is prescribed by the National Fire Protection Association standard. It's not mandatory, but it's highly recommended that after a fire, examinations be done of the forensic evidence and the testimony in case that would have been criminal. Well, you would think that the experts of the National Institute of Standards and Technology would look for evidence of criminal activity, since this is the only time in history that a steel frame high-rise was destroyed by fire. You'd think they would like to leave no stone unturned. Guess what? They did leave the stones unturned. They refused to test the forensic evidence for traces of thermite. And their explanation was that they knew for a fact that there would be no traces of thermite, and therefore they would be wasting taxpayers' money looking for something that they knew wasn't there. Fortunately, some independent researchers did look for thermite. Professor Stephen Jones from Brigham Young University visited a 9/11 monument on the Canadian border. He found there a piece of steel coming from Building 7. And this is what he found on a piece of steel. Some kind of cuts that look like it's molten metal. He managed to take some samples of this molten metal, examine them in his lab with an electron microscope, and the first thing he found is that these were predominantly iron, which would be expected on a beam of iron. He also found that the samples did not match the expected compositions of structural steel. Some common additives of structural steel were missing. As he tested them for thermatic compounds, he did find that indeed they had some aluminum and oxygen, which is compatible with the theory that this is thermatic iron resolidified. As he examined further, he found the presence of atoms of potassium and manganese, which is compatible with the possibility that because thermite is hard to ignite, the demolitionists should have put some potassium permanganate in it to ignite it with less effort. But then Professor Jones was puzzled because he found some traces of fluorine in this residue. And as much as he would search for it, he could not find a reason why somebody would put fluorine in thermite. Until he figured that there was a new kind of thermite that had been developed recently by the US military in the 1990s that is called nanothermite. And this makes us open a parenthesis on the emerging branch of engineering called nanotechnology. You know that the matter that we experience every day is composed of molecules, and that the molecules are composed of atoms. There exist about 100 atoms in the universe, and they combine to form everything that we see around us. Those atoms are very small. Their size is about 1 billionth of a meter, which is 1 nanometer, 1,000th of a micrometer, and a millionth of a millimeter, something extremely small. And nanotechnology is a new branch of engineering which is in its infancy, which manipulates the matter at the atomic level. Sometimes atom by atom, building structures with one atom, another atom, a third atom, like Lego. So fluorine, according to Professor Jones' investigation, could be part of a new type of thermite called nanothermite, which would be exclusively used by the US military. Of course, had he published the finding that it seemed that nanothermite was used in Building 7, he may have been labeled a nutty conspiracy theorist. So he figured that, well, if nanothermite was used in Building 7, what else would there be? And he found that the particular technology used to make nanothermite would produce, during the destruction of Building 7, a fluid compound called 1,3-diphenylpropane. I said it. 1,3-diphenylpropane is a very long name for an organic molecule which is not really complicated. The molecule of 1,3-diphenylpropane is composed of 2 circles of carbon atoms linked by a small branch, like a pair of glasses. Here, 2 circles linked by a little branch. And there are atoms of oxygen or of hydrogen all around them. Anyway, since the 1,3-diphenylpropane is fluid, it could not possibly be inside that residue. So Professor Jones had the idea of looking at the reports of the air in the World Trade Center by the Environmental Protection Agency after 9/11. Would they have found some 1,3-diphenylpropane in the air of the World Trade Center after the destruction of Building 7? Well, indeed, the EPA report of the air quality of the World Trade Center reports an abnormally high presence of 1,3-diphenylpropane, which the EPA attributed to some computer fires. But they did not explain why this particular fire would yield so much of this product that other office fires didn't. So this is coherent with the idea that it would not just be thermite that was used to destroy Building 7, but military-grade nanothermite. Professor Jones still wasn't comfortable enough to publish his finding, so he went a little further. Would there be by any chance some tangible evidence of thermite in the powder that covered Manhattan? You remember these images of about 10 centimeters worth of dust covering the streets of Manhattan after 9/11. And Professor Jones did not really have to examine this dust because the United States Geological Survey did study the 9/11 powder, and they found these intriguing microscopic spheres of iron, about 1 micrometer in width, many of them invisible to the naked eye. Now, such spheres of iron are not produced in nature. There's no industrial process that produces them, not even as a byproduct. So they are compatible with the idea that they're produced by the melting of iron on 9/11 in the World Trade Center, that molten iron would have been sprayed in high pressure. The liquid iron would have formed itself into droplets, and the droplets would have solidified. Unfortunately, the United States Geological Survey acknowledged the presence of these microspheres, labeled them a mystery, but did not analyze their composition. Another similar finding came from a corporation, RGE. They were contracted to settle some insurance matter regarding the World Trade Center, and they determined that a specific sample of powder came from the World Trade Center's destruction because it contained these spheres of iron which were found only in the World Trade Center powder. So when Professor Jones got a handle on a sample of the 9/11 powder, he was not surprised to find in his microscope those microspheres of iron. And he did what his colleague didn't do. He put them under his electron microscope and he analyzed their composition. And guess what he found? Composition matching not what would be expected from structural steel, but what would be expected from thermite and nanothermite. So it seemed like he was getting somewhere. He still was not comfortable publishing his findings, though. It's so easy, you have no idea how easy it is to be labeled a nutty conspiracy theorist these days. It's only a couple of years ago that Professor Jones had the idea of putting under his microscope some very small chip, some reddish chip that was in his powder that he had never paid attention to. And he quickly found that this chip had a very special structure. It looked like some nanostructure, something that was engineered at the atomic level. This is a picture of one such chip. It is red on one side and whitish on the other side. The red side actually is thermitic. It contains grains of aluminum, the fuel, and it contains grains of iron oxide, the oxidizer. The size of these grains is nanoscopic, literally. They are much thinner than anything that nature produces. They are thinner than regular thermite, and they can be produced only at specialized facilities, which at the time happened to be all under the control of the US military. This is a closer picture where you can see some of the grains here. I believe on the next one, this is an official picture of the nanothermite produced by the US military. This is, for instance, 1 grain of aluminum, and its width is about 30 atoms of aluminum. Similarly, these grains of iron oxide are about 30 atoms in diameter, which means that when the oxygen migrates from the iron oxide to the aluminum, it has a very small path to walk. This makes the nanothermite much more reactive than ordinary thermite. And according to the official military documents, It can even be made into an explosive. As he pursued his luck, Professor Jones found in his sample of powder what seemed to be partly burnt nanothermite. This is a sample where this part here is fresh. We can recognize the red iron oxide mixed with the aluminum, and this part has burnt. The oxygen has left the iron, and this color here is due to the iron. This is the color of the raw iron. And we can see here the formations that look like spheres. This is another sample where it's obvious that the microsphere is being formed. So by looking deep into the World Trade Center powder, Professor Jones and his collaborators were capable of finding not only traces of burnt thermite and nanothermite, but also some samples of unburnt thermite. And this led to the publication of an article in a scientific journal in 2009, which is still the authority on this matter today.
And one of the co-authors was just recently in this room. He had to leave early tonight. I was very proud of it. That's right.
We conclude our examination of the use of thermite in the World Trade Center by finding that, well, it would indeed look like the hypothetical controlled demolition of Building 7 would have used thermite and probably nanothermite to melt the structural steel. We have found more evidence to doubt the technical plausibility of the destruction by an office fire, and most important, it seems that we found another instance of fraud by the official investigators from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It seems like they went to great lengths to not analyze the residues of the steel cuts of Building 7 and to not analyze the powder of the World Trade Center. Yet it was not difficult to analyze that forensic evidence. We have to conclude that as we start building more doubt on the integrity of the work of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, we are also doubting the plausibility of the destruction by an office fire, and we are giving ever more credibility to the destruction by controlled demolition. Maybe our next logical step is to take a closer look at one hypothesis that underlies the theory of the destruction by fire, that is that an office fire would be capable of destroying the steel framed high-rise. Let's take a further look at that underlying assumption. How much merit is there behind it? Well, tens of thousands of people work in steel framed high-rises. Accordingly, no matter how much precaution people take, there will be fires in high-rises. It's not desirable, but it's inevitable. And some of these fires blow out of proportion, are impossible to control. And it's a challenge for firefighters to climb up into a high-rise to put out the fire. Conclusion, raging, long-lasting, intense fires are a fact of life for steel-framed high-rises. And every once in a while, these things happen. Here are pictures of a few of these fires, one of them being in downtown Los Angeles 20 years ago. I think it's this one without being sure. Anyway, fires have been very intense, have lasted for a long time, and they have one thing in common. They do not provoke structural failures of the steel frame in a steel frame high-rise. They affect just about everything but that. Case in point, Building 5 of the World Trade Center. This is Building 5 on 9/11. Now this is a real fire, quite intense. And granted, there was structural damage to Building 7 on the inside, but that one can be possibly explained by the drop of heavy pieces of steel from the Twin Towers. If we look at the facade of Building 7 after the fire, here it is. The fire was not fought, it was left to run its course, and the steel frame is still pretty much intact.
That's building 5 is.
Yes. The steel frame is pretty much intact, and the few flaws we see there can reasonably be attributed to lateral projections of steel from the twin towers, which we know they happen. So this is an expected result of a catastrophic fire in a steel frame building. By contrast, let's have a look at the fires of Building 7. This is one of the few pictures we have of the north facade of Building 7. A few fires around the 10th floor, and please note that, this line here is not the top of Building 7. Building 7 goes way, probably up to the roof of this room. So these fires, compared to what we saw in the previous pictures, are rather insignificant.
It's just the reflection from the building on this side.
Yeah, this is a shadow from the other building, or reflection, yes. Now, 9/11 defenders of the official 9/11 story recently produced a movie that shows very thick clouds of smoke billowing out of the southern facade of Building 7. Nothing on the west side, nothing on the east side, everything on the south side. There's no flame. Other pictures of the southern side of Building 7 do not show anything remotely comparable to this. So some claim that there's a conspiracy theory behind this movie. But even assuming it would be real, and even assuming there would be some raging fires behind this thick smoke, which has never been seen in other high-rises before, and even assuming those fires would be capable of weakening the southern frame of Building 7, if Building 7 would fall because of that, it would fall sideways, which it didn't. So we conclude that it's hard to believe that Building 7 could be destroyed by office fires. It would take an incredibly credible technical demonstration for us to believe that, and we have found so far that the work by the National Institute of Standards and Technology is anything but rigorous. Our next step, and maybe our last technical step as we explore Building 7's destruction, is to have a final look at the work of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So far we found instances of egregious fraud in it. It looks like these people knew that Building 7 was demolished and tried hard to find some other explanation. Let's see if we can take a closer look at what they did. And maybe we have to start with a previous work by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which produced a report on Building 7's destruction in 2002. FEMA mentioned that some of the forensic steel of Building 7 showed traces of rapid oxidation, which would be an attack by the oxygen from the air. This can normally happen only at very high temperatures. They talked also of rapid sulfidation. Well, steel can react with sulfur, but this requires two conditions. A, the temperature has to be very high, and B, there has to be sulfur. And sulfur is a product that would be prohibited in an office building. Sulfur is very flammable. It's oxide, it's toxic, and if it reacts with water, it becomes sulfuric acid. Not the kind of component that people would tolerate in an office building. So this begs the question, where would the sulfur be coming from? And FEMA had the answer: they didn't know. They also find evidence of melting of the steel, which they did not explain. This is a picture that they had, and since we're running out of time, we're going to move faster. They also had a metaphor of a girder turning into Swiss cheese. The girders of Building 7, the 47-foot tower, were much more solid than anything you will find in the Inland Empire. No offense meant. So this is a girder which was a couple of centimeters thick, which has been, ground to the point where there are some holes in it, like a Swiss cheese literally. And what remains appears to be red, which indicates that the iron has been oxidized by oxygen or maybe by sulfur. FEMA also noted that it looked like building 7 was imploded. They also noted, correctly from our perspective, that the hypothesis of fire did not really explain well the forensic evidence. I believe we couldn't agree more. And they also concluded that they needed further research, investigation, and analysis. At this point, we would beg to differ, and we would correct FEMA by stating that they did not have to look very far. However, it ought to be noted that one factor that impeded their investigation was that with the authorization of FEMA, all the structural steel of Building 7 ended up in China. This is one photo of structural steel cuts coming fresh from the World Trade Center on a barge in New York. Just briefly, not everybody was happy with the shipment of the structural steel without analyzing it, without even systematically photographing the cuts. It could be said that the Fire Engineering magazine editorialized that it was a grave mistake to ship the World Trade Center steel to China without any analysis. It was crucial evidence that would be used to understand what happened, and its removal would compromise the investigation. The 9/11 Commission had also its own way to treat Building 7, it ignored it. And finally, if we had any doubt that maybe the experts from the National Institute of Standards and Technology had no idea about the existence of thermite and nanothermite, many experts who worked on the report of the destruction of Building 7 by an office fire were very knowledgeable on nanothermite because they took part in its development. Here is one, Mr. Williams, who is from San Diego next door, an expert in nanothermite and a guru of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. This concludes our investigation of the technical aspects of Building 7's destruction. At this point, we have to conclude that it looks like Building 7 was destroyed by a controlled demolition, probably using thermite and possibly nanothermite. The theory that attributes the destruction of Building 7 to an office fire ignited by the projection of structural steel from the North Tower has no technical validity whatsoever and shall be rejected. Furthermore, the report of the National Institute of Standards and Technology on this matter, which happens to ignore what FEMA did, among other things, is worthless and appears to be fraudulent. It looks like the National Institute of Standards and Technology went to great length to see no evidence that would link the destruction of Building 7 to a controlled demolition. So based on this technical analysis, we shall accept the above as tentative conclusions. Our next step is to double check our technical against some non-technical evidence like gossip. Starting with, there were people who were there when Building 7 was apparently demolished. Firefighters, paramedics, policemen. Those people have some training on disasters, so they may have a feeling of what happened. Assuming now there was a conspiracy to cover up the controlled demolition of Building 7, which is what the National Institute of Standards and Technology did, we should expect that most of these people would zip it, would not talk about anything that would lead people to believe that Building 7 was demolished. Yet maybe if we look, we'll find some of these testimonies. Well, indeed, we don't have to look very far. We did find some of them. When we started to examine the onset of Building 7's destruction, we listened to a paramedic who recalled that the destruction started at the base of Building 7. When we examined the evidence of molten iron, we listened to people who were there, who did witness molten iron one way or another. We listened to Craig Barker from the New York Police who witnessed explosions in Building 7. And now all of a sudden, it makes you wonder, remember how Craig Barker said that all the guys should say that? meaning everybody in the New York Police Department who was there ought to say that they were explosions. This is compatible with the theory that Building 7 was demolished and there's a cover-up at work. We attributed Bartner's statement to some nonsense, maybe his mental health is not quite right, but under the hypothesis of a cover-up, it makes a lot of sense. He would be one of the few people within the NYPD who stick their neck out. How about whistleblowers? Well, remember how Barry Jennings claimed that he witnessed explosions while he was alone in Building 7 during the afternoon, and how he somehow died coincidentally shortly before Building 7's technical report was released? Well, could it be that it was not a coincidence? Could it be that somehow somebody thought that he would speak and that the best way to silence him was to just get rid of him? I'm not affirming that it happened, but that's compatible with the idea of a cover-up. And that also puts in another perspective the fact that his colleague, Mr. Hess, first testified to loose change that he did experience explosions in Building 7, and then told the BBC that he did not, and that he is still alive. I'm not affirming this, but this is compatible with the idea that Building 7 was demolished and there's a powerful force at work to cover it up. Let's move on. If Building 7 was demolished, like we believe it was, you'd think that experts in demolition would recognize that. But here again, if there's a conspiracy to cover it up, maybe experts in demolition know that Building 7 is a taboo subject. And you're welcome to try this when you have time, but contact some of the demolition companies. There are quite a few out there. They are easy to find on the web. And ask them about Building 7. In the past, many people have asked them about Building 7 and they don't want to talk. So some 9/11 truth seekers, a bit smarter than the others, managed to corner an expert in controlled demolition in Europe, Mr. Jowenko in Holland. They showed him videos of Building 7 without telling him what it was. We will not show you the video because the guy speaks in Dutch, but they make one sentence that you're capable of understanding. Quote, that is controlled demolition, unquote. Clear enough? He said it without hesitating, he repeated it, and he elaborated that obviously it was the work of experts like him. And when people told him that this was something in the World Trade Center, he appeared to be uncomfortable. Let's move on. If Building 7 was demolished, as we believe it was, some people would know in advance. And if there was a conspiracy to cover it up, well, it's not going to be easy to find it. Let's look for it anyway. Let's listen to CNN shortly before Building's destruction, and please observe the demeanor of the main police officer who's evacuating the place. Does he look like somebody who is concerned that Building 7 will fall at any time and that they are all in danger? Or is he somebody who knows that Building 7 will fall, but not yet? There's still time to get out of there, and we have to make sure that nobody is left behind. Observe. Okay, this is it all. The BBC announced the destruction of Building 7 20 minutes in advance. This is Building 7 standing on the back as they announced it. Later, the BBC unfortunately lost the master tapes of 9/11, and therefore they cannot investigate what happened. So this is compatible with the idea of a cover-up of a controlled demolition again, and this is CNN. Excuse me, this is CNN at 11 a.m., half an hour after the North Tower fell.
In New York, Frank joins us on the phone, you're lower on the cat now.
Just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. This event is taking me in on Main Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by us that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke. It's like a fire, a forest fire roaring down a canyon. Now, as I think Patty Fabian and others have told you, all of Manhattan is covered, downtown Manhattan is covered with thick white ash and building materials.
Evidently, this report is incorrect. There was no building of 50 stories that fell right after the North Tower. However, building 7 was 47 stories tall. So this story is compatible with the theory that building 7 would have fallen right after the North Tower. And indeed, as the reporter said, had that happened, it would have been obscured by the powder that engulfed Manhattan, not to mention the confusion that people experienced due to the fresh destruction of the Twin Towers. This brings us to the point that I'm not going to affirm it, but there's a possibility that the demolition engineers of Building 7 wanted to blow it up right after the North Tower. Had they done so, Building 7 would have been masked by the powder generated by the North Tower, and we would not have this video. We would not have the smoking gun. We have to conclude at this point that the anecdotal gossip evidence confirms our findings of the controlled demolition of Building 7, of the technical impossibility of the destruction by fire, and of the fraud committed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology as they made their determination. Now, this brings us to the conclusion that there are really 3 levels to Building 7's conspiracy. The first level is the criminal controlled demolition of Building 7 in violation of laws and regulations that limit the possibility of doing that kind of stuff. There's a conspiracy by the US government to cover up this event. People who are in charge of preventing criminal activity covered it up. That's arguably more serious. But then going back to the problem of television, it is quite alarming that not a single TV channel anywhere in the world gave us this information, because it's not difficult to find and it's something that's very important. This is a crime of a very high magnitude that actually makes us mistrust the executive branch of the US government. And here we're not just talking of television. This kind of information could very well fill a few pages of the Los Angeles Times or one of the national magazines. It could also be reported by the foreign media if the US media won't do it. Not only that, but there's also a problem with the major scientific and technical outfits. This is the kind of stuff that should have been denounced by the American Society of Civil Engineers or their foreign counterparts. But they did not happen. This kind of stuff should be taught in civil engineering faculties everywhere. Even here, isn't there a university in Redlands? Help me, guys.
University of Redlands, yes.
There is one, okay, well.
I don't know if they confer engineering degrees, but I know they study science and technology, and they have physics.
Okay, well, would there be a university somewhere in the Inland Empire that would have a faculty of civil engineering?
UCR.
And if there is one, why don't you look for it on the web and send an email to some professors, stay polite, but regret that they did not open their doors and make a conference on the criminal controlled demolition of Building 7 and on its cover-up by the US government. It's not normal that it's an ordinary engineer like me who has to show this to the public. This should have been done by the media or by people whose job it is to lead the technical community. Yet those people are apparently asleep when it comes to Building 7. And this is probably the most alarming conclusion of our investigation into Building 7. The first level of the conspiracy of Building 7 is the demolition. The second level, which is much more disturbing, is the cover-up of this criminal activity by the US government. And the third level is that the numerous watchdogs who should have raised the alarm about this and should have brought this to the public's attention have not done so. It also bears remarking that, okay, I'm an engineer, The people who have put together this show are architects and engineers. We are, no offense meant, much smarter than the average folks. We are little math geniuses, if you will. But this is simple enough that you don't have to be one of us to understand it. You don't have to be one of us to even sustain it. And more important, you don't have to be one of us to teach it. Or, let me see. I mean, something like this can be understood by virtually anybody. A 10-year-old child is capable of understanding that the destruction of Building 7 resembles very much a controlled demolition. And once you are there, you are in the rabbit hole, and it's difficult to not go all the way. So, this is done. Oh yeah, now where do we go? So we've got now we know that the 9/11 conspiracy exists. One important element of the official 9/11 narrative, the destruction of Building 7 by an office fire, is a fraud. It's a conspiracy. And therefore, there is such a thing as a 9/11 conspiracy. We know it covers Building 7, and it may cover something else, and that we don't know. We also know that the 9/11 conspiracy goes way beyond 9/11. This is not about the criminal controlled demolition of Building 7 or its US cover-up, but about the fact that the watchdogs do not bark. The media, the technical and scientific professionals should have raised the alarm, and they didn't. So this is the real Building 7 conspiracy. There seems like there's a concerted effort to not inform properly the public. And this leads us to our next step.
All right.
What else could this conspiracy hide from us? Well, maybe it's not far-fetched to imagine that the Twin Towers would be an excellent candidate. Their destruction is very similar to Building 7. It was sudden, unexpected, rapid, complete. They were at the same spot as Building 7. We're finishing.
All right.
Okay, just a couple of minutes. They were at the same spot as Building 7. They were destroyed a few hours earlier, so it makes sense to ask the question, could it be that the Twin Towers, like Building 7, were criminally demolished? Could it be that the US investigation into this event is also a fraud? And could it be that there was a conspiracy to hide that very important information from us, the gullible people? So, action item. As you get out of here, ask Stephen to organize an event on the Twin Towers. Let's explore what happened to the Twin Towers, just in case.